Oh, that's awesome. Well, hey, good morning. Once again, LivePoint, if you've never had a chance to meet, my name's Nick. It's always good to be with you here this weekend. Also want to say welcome if you're joining us online. Hey, this weekend we are continuing the series, All I Want for Christmas, and if it's okay, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. So if you take your outline out of your program, we're going to start with a verse right there at the top. I'll read out loud. You can follow along. Here's the verse we've been kind of using in this series. It's in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. It says this, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." And as we jump into the message and continue the series here this weekend, I know every weekend you've sort of been kind of looking at different aspects of this prophecy about Jesus. By the way, and we'll unpack this a little more this morning, Isaiah chapter 9 is a prophecy about Jesus Christ and his message and what it means for our life. But this weekend, I kind of want to step back from that and just kind of look at this verse on its own, really from a basic level. And I think regardless of where we're at with biblical interpretation and where we're at in our faith, we can say this about this verse. Man, this is good news, right? Just from a really basic standpoint, this seems like this is good news. In fact, the word gospel, something you might hear around this time of year around church, gospel really simply translates good news. It's good news about Jesus Christ. And it's an interesting, this is a good time of year to hear good news. One of the things I love, particularly about this time of year, is getting Christmas cards from people, right? We tend to get those, this time of year, and those have kind of changed. I remember when I was a kid, maybe some of you remember this too. You remember getting the Christmas letter from people? It was like sort of this 8.5 by 11 typed out sheet. It was like the original like Facebook update, right? And then it would have like a clip art reindeer at the bottom, and sort of just kind of like what happened this year. And with kind of the advent of social media, you don't see too many Christmas letters anymore, but you do see these Christmas cards, kind of this 5x7 postcard highlighting, what happened this year. In fact, we sent one out as a family, wanted to show it to you. We have a picture of it. You can tell I'm very proud of it. I noticed this morning I'm in fact wearing the same shirt now that I was then, and so you can sort of tell where I'm at with it. I said, hey, Rusty, would you bring the Christmas card? I want to show it, and then realized he wasn't on the list, and so just kidding. And I found out that's actually true. Rusty, you are getting one. So he's like, at the end of service earlier, he was like, I didn't get a card. Like, oh, crap. Probably shouldn't. Anyway, so in this, though, in the Christmas card, what you have is sort of this just depiction, of a family. And sort of here's the idea behind it. If you send these out or if you get them, right, it's the idea that, man, this is normal, right? Like as a family, we totally do this all the time. This is like a normal Thursday for us. We're just on a bridge in perfect lighting, and we let our son run loose in a field, and, and he just frolics. It's sort of the way, like how could you, it's like you're asking yourself a question, how can I communicate to people that I had a perfect year? I know, a Christmas card through a professional photographer, right? So that's kind of what we do. You guys can take that down, thanks. But I was thinking about reflecting on the concept of the Christmas card coming into this weekend. And what's fascinating about it, even in our own family, in my own life, right? What's fascinating about the Christmas card is you don't have to have a great year to have a great card. You don't even have to have a great month. You don't have to have a great week. You don't even have to have a great hour. You just have to have a really great 10 seconds as a family in order to be able to communicate to your friends, family, strategic business associates that we had an amazing year, Like, man, we are happy, We had a joy-filled year, even if you didn't. And it's sort of the idea that you can kind of pull a backdrop behind your joy, your family for just an instant and communicate to everyone, man, this is what our year was like, even if it wasn't. And I don't know if you've noticed that to be true, like I have in my own life and family, is that when it comes to experiencing joy, when it comes to experiencing, especially around this time of year, reflecting on what was this year like, sometimes there's this idea that what I want to project is different from what I've experienced. Maybe you've realized that to be true as well, is I at least want people to have a concept that I had a great year, even if it wasn't so great, even if it was kind of filled with ups and downs and those types of moments. And so what I want to do this morning, just to give us a roadmap of where we're headed, is to look at what does it mean to experience real joy. Maybe if we can put it in that context, what does it mean to experience the type of joy that we're portraying? What does it mean to really live that out? And maybe on a level deeper than that, what is the Christmas season, the story about Jesus, what does it invite us to in terms of that joy? So what I want to do is just take a look, if you're following along on your outline, take a look at what gets in the way. What prohibits us from experiencing, what kind of steals that joy? Joy stealers, if you're following along. Number one, skeptical critics. Right, I think the first thing that can kind of steal our joy or get in the way is cynics. Skeptical cynics. And cynical people, let's be honest, they're kind of hard to be around any time of year, but especially like around the holidays, right? These are the people that say, there's not that much joy in this season. I don't really like Christmas. I'm more of a Halloween person. You know, it's sort of like, hey, you're telling them the great things that happened this year. You're telling them what you're excited for, and they're kind of like, just wait, it'll get worse. You know, it's kind of like, these are the kinds of people that can kind of, skeptical cynics can sort of get in the way of our joy. The second thing that can steal our joy is recurring disappointment. I know Pastor Rusty highlighted last weekend the idea, this verse from Proverbs, which says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick." It's a concept in Scripture, right? It's the idea that when what we're hoping for doesn't happen, we experience this disappointment. And I think the reality this weekend, maybe for some of us here this weekend, maybe you're new to the faith thing, and in fact, maybe this was the year you put your faith in Jesus for the first time. That's a great decision, by the way. But you put your faith in Jesus for the first time. You prayed, you hoped, you expected for something to work out, and then it didn't, right? And then there was a moment where there's that incongruency in what we're hoping for, what we're praying for, what we're believing for in faith, and it doesn't happen. And I think the reality is when our faith and expectations don't line up with the outcome, it can be really difficult to find and experience joy. We can have these recurring disappointments that can get in the way of our joy this time of year. The third thing that can steal our joy is lonely seasons. Right? Lonely seasons. By the way, just so you know, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the invitation around Christmas that's the antidote to these things. Just so you know, we're not going to highlight a bunch of reasons we don't have joy and then pray and go home. Just wanted to let you know that up front. But lonely seasons can get in the way of joy in our life when we're feeling isolated. I remember for several years I was on staff. Actually, Rusty and I worked at the same church. We were on staff there. And so Christmas Eve, sort of Christmas, that season kind of took on a different type of experience. And it's an exciting time, by the way. I know Rusty highlighted what you have coming up with Christmas Eve services, serving one, attending one. Man, it's amazing. Encourage you to do that. Bring a friend, bring a neighbor, bring a coworker. God does amazing things in people's lives around Christmas Eve. And so we were a part of that at our church and experiencing it, and man, it was awesome, but it sort of just kind of reframed how we approached Christmas, and we had all these Christmas Eve services, and it became more of a work day than a holiday kind of thing. So what we decided as our family is it was just going to look a little different, man. By the time we get to Christmas Day, we'd be wiped out and not really wanting to host a big celebration or anything like that. So we said, hey, we're going to do Christmas a little different kind of in this season. So just my wife, Chris, and I, and my parents, and we said, man, we're not going to do the normal Christmas thing. What could we do that'd be a little different? And so we're kind of creating like a criteria. Well, we'd love to go somewhere maybe and have a meal that was really good. Maybe have some options on that meal. And so as we're kind of going back and forth, like where could we find that experience? And what we landed on was a casino. Right, is true story. Is it was sort of like, man, where has casinos often have a decent spread. You know they're going to be open on Christmas. I meant a spread of food, not a bet spread. Just as clarify. And so, we're going back and forth on it. Like, man, do I really want to spend, Christmas Day in a casino? I'm probably going to run into Rusty and his family again and all, that kind of thing. And so, but sure enough, that became our Christmas tradition as our family. For like 6 years in a row, we'd go, we'd look up online what the buffet was going to be, check out the menu, check different places out. Something fascinating that's always kind of stuck with me from that, though, is what I noticed is we weren't the only people spending Christmas in a casino. And not just in the restaurant. What I noticed is the casino would oftentimes be packed, oftentimes with people spending their Christmas alone there, right? Alone on Christmas Day. They're there in a casino. And here's my guess, regardless of what they would have said to me, that deep down on some level, when they envisioned their Christmas season and their Christmas day, they probably didn't envision it spending it alone in a casino, kind of surrounded by people who are in the same place. And I think lonely seasons can really, if we're honest, when we're lonely, when we feel isolated, it can be really difficult to focus in on joy and to experience joy in our life. Well, the fourth joy stealer for us is unforgettable rejection. Unforgettable rejection. I think this is the time of year where often, we reflect and we think back on what the year's been like, and that's great to do, something I love doing. But at the same time, I know that in reflection, sometimes we come back to moments of rejection, maybe not this year, but maybe it's a really significant moment, a moment we felt rejected, maybe for what we did or for who we were. We felt like we were rejected on such a deep level that anytime we're alone, anytime we reflect, it's almost like inevitable that we come back to that place of rejection. And in those moments, in that season of rejection, it can be almost impossible to move past that into joy. So what we do is we discover four invitations from Isaiah chapter 9, invitations during the Christmas season towards joy. Number one, if you're following along, for the skeptical, rediscover joy beyond past hurts. For the skeptical, there's an invitation to rediscover joy beyond past hurts. Here's what Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2 says. This is just a few verses before the prophecy about Jesus. It says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned." And this one can be difficult for me, I'll be honest with you. In many ways, I'm a natural skeptic, right? I'm a product of the Northwest. I tend to be skeptical about things like, people's charity at times. I'm like, okay, did they really mean that? What people say, do they really, are they really living out what they're kind of talking about? The Seattle Seahawks, I tend to be skeptical about their future, right? Even though we're believing for God's best in this season, in Jesus' name. But I can be a natural skeptic. What's interesting, Isaiah chapter 9 is written to a group of people that are pretty skeptical. It's written to the nation of Israel when they're in captivity in Babylon. In fact, that's part of God's plan in Habakkuk, is that this nation of Babylon was going to be powerful and take over Israel, and it's all part of God's eternal plan. However, what we notice is this prophecy, this invitation, that the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. It's written to a group of people who are kind of skeptical, who are unsure about the future. And I think what's interesting about that is this is a great time of year. This time of year, if I can be honest with you, is a great time of year to maybe do this, to make a decision to find joy even beyond some of your past hurts. Maybe you do this in this season. You'd give yourself a gift, the gift of moving on. Maybe the gift of closing a chapter in your life that's kind of made you into a skeptic. I work at a Christian university, and what's interesting about that experience, I have a chance to kind of talk to students who are in their journey, and I not for all the students, but I notice for a number of them, they kind of follow this arc, right? As when they come into college as a freshman or maybe a transfer sophomore, that kind of thing, when they step into our environment, they're so excited, they're so passionate about what God's doing in their life. They feel like, man, I'm going to change the world. God's going to use me to change the world in a powerful and a meaningful way, and I really believe God is. And what's interesting, though, is see, over time, over their years with us, I noticed that as time goes on, they can begin to become more and more skeptical. It's like, well, that person didn't really respond to me in the way I was hoping for. Maybe for them it's a relationship that goes south that they were really expecting to work out and it doesn't. And so they can begin to become, even as college students, sort of skeptical for the future. And I think it's so important in this season to say, you know what, maybe I'll choose to believe again. Maybe there's an invitation this weekend to rediscover joy even beyond past hurt and pain in our lives. Number two, for the discouraged, for those of us who maybe have experienced this recurring disappointment, for the discouraged, we remember God's eternal plan. We remember God's eternal plan. In Isaiah chapter 9:7, same chapter, it says this: of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. And what's really interesting about Isaiah chapter 9, if we can unpack it just for a moment, is this is written as a political prophecy, right? It's written to, as I mentioned a second ago, Israel's in captivity in Babylon. They don't have a lot of hope. They're probably skeptical on what their future is going to be like. And this is written from God through the prophet Isaiah, and God says to them that there's a day coming where you're going to be politically liberated. And so this prophecy about Jesus, maybe you knew this, maybe you didn't, it is really about him as a political figure, as a leader. And in fact, that's what the verse says in Isaiah chapter 9:7, of the increase of his government, there will be no end. There's political overtones to this. And what's interesting about that reality politically is that when Jesus is born, what we find in the New Testament, in the story about Jesus' birth, the nation of Israel is still occupied, but it's by a different occupier. It's by the Roman government. And what's interesting about that is the Roman Empire has appointed a king over this region, and his name is King Herod. Maybe you're familiar with some of his background and story. The figure of Herod is an incredible political leader. He's a Jewish national who has self-anointed himself to Caesar to be the king of this region. And we learn some really interesting things about Herod when we look back historically. We learn that he's incredibly conniving. He executes many of his own sons, and he's fearful that they'll try to take over his throne. He wants to gain favor with Caesar, so what he does is he builds a city and names it Caesarea Philippi, and at the time creates the largest port in the world. At the time, the largest port in the ancient world was 25 acres in Greece. King Herod builds a 60-acre port, fills it with landfill, creates this amazing metropolis there. And in fact, when you pull into this port, Herod wanted it to be so impressive and so great, highlighting his own greatness, that he has every building in the port, he has the surface built out of marble. So you'd pull into this ancient city and see this massive port covered with marble stone. It was this incredible sight, and Herod's this incredible political leader that we infer from history. What we don't even have to infer about, what's documented historically, is that Herod is incredibly wealthy. He has the equivalent wealth today of hundreds of billions of dollars. He has a heavy tax on every single person in the region. It's all for Herod's personal wealth. And see, what's really interesting to me about the story of Herod compared with the story of Jesus is in the prophecy about Jesus, when it says, of the increase of his government there would be no end, it would sort of be tempting to think that person would be someone like Herod. In fact, if we were to bet on both of them, right? If we were to say, hey, let's take a bet. Who do you think is going to have, who are we going to talk about? Who's history going to remember? This wealthy king, billionaire, political leader, really one of the most prominent leaders in the ancient world? Or is it going to be this baby born to unwed parents, born to a teen mom who's born in a barn. That's what the historical account tells us, right? Is we'd all, I think if we're honest, we'd all say, yeah, probably the king, right? But what's fascinating is King Herod, the only time most of us hear about King Herod is around the story of Jesus. And it's just a footnote. It's like, by the way, Herod was the governor. And it's just sort of a historical marker so that we can highlight who this baby is, who this, the Son of God is that's born into humanity. And it's a fascinating reality that even when we can't see it, that God has this eternal plan going. That if you were to look objectively and say, which government is going to continue, where's all the power going to be, we'd all probably say Herod. But what we discover throughout history, even today, 2 billion people on earth align their faith with Jesus Christ, who's a baby in this story. And so we discover in the Christmas story that when we're discouraged, God has an eternal plan. And at the risk of sounding cliche or trite, and I don't want to do that, but maybe you're here this weekend, and man, maybe for you it's really difficult to believe in God's plan. Maybe you've experienced things this year that make you question, where's God at? He seems distant. He seems disinterested. I don't know that God cares about what's happening in my life. And the invitation at Christmas time through the story of Jesus is that God still has an eternal plan. God still has a plan, not just for humanity, not just for the human story overall, but for our story, for my own life, for your life, right? That God still has a plan that we might not be able to see all of, but that he's working behind the scenes. And Christmas is a powerful reminder of that. Number 3, for the isolated, for the lonely, there's an invitation to recognize when God has taken the first step. We recognize when God's taken the first step. Isaiah chapter 9:1, in this prophecy about Jesus, here's what it says: "Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress." And the idea there is that even for those who are in distress, that I'm coming their way, that God is taking a step towards us in that. Theologically, here's the word we use for that. It's called the incarnation. And it's a really powerful word. It's the idea that God takes on human form, that there's an incarnation in humanity of God. Karl Barth, maybe you're familiar with him. He's one of the most influential, prolific theologians of the 20th century. He speaks to the incarnation and the theological reality of it. Here's what he says. He says, God is completely unknowable. The idea that we would be able to know God simply on our own power is impossible, because anything we could construct on our own would not be God. And then he speaks to the incarnation. He says, on top of that, the power of the incarnation is this unknowable God steps into human form. And when you think about it, it's an incredible concept, right? That even in our distress, like that verse says, maybe even in our isolation, that God steps into our world, right? That God takes the first step our way. And here's what I know, though, man. Maybe if you're here and you're in that lonely season, if you're here and you're feeling isolated, it might be difficult to say, yeah, that's great news, Nick, I guess. I don't know that I recognize and feel God taking steps toward me in that season. I know for me, I have a friend, a colleague I work with. We've become pretty good friends, and he's walking through a pretty isolated season right now. In fact, his marriage of 28 years has just unwound on him out of nowhere, and he's walking through it, and he said to me something really profound. We were on a trip together this week, actually. We were talking, and he said, he's been in ministry. He worked with the Billy Graham Association. Just done incredible things for God, and this has kind of blindsided him. And he said, you know what, though, Nick? This is a chance for me to put everything I've ever believed in into practice. And he's saying, this is my opportunity. I've kind of said, God's there for you. God's close. God's near. And he said that in this season of my life, I've just had to turn towards God and let him be close. And it's amazing. I mean, it serves as a testament, I think, for me and maybe for all of us, when we've walked alongside people who are in that isolation and they say, you know what, I'm choosing to believe God's best. I'm choosing to believe that God's still there and he's still close. It's a powerful reminder. And I think that's what we discover about this invitation, that if you're here and you're feeling isolated, man, maybe it's been a lonely year, that God has taken the first step your direction. Well, number 4, the fourth invitation is for the rejected. It's an invitation to realize the significance of forgiveness. For the rejected, the invitation is to realize there's a significance in forgiveness. You know, I think that if we're honest, rejection, and we've all experienced rejection, rejection's probably the area of our life that gets in the way of our joy the most, because when we've experienced rejection on a deep level, it creates insecurity, right? It creates uncertainty. It creates even questions in our own identity, right? If someone has rejected, maybe it was a person, maybe it was a family member, maybe it was a situation in your career where you were rejected, and it calls into question, do I really know who I am? Where's my identity in this? And when we're rejected, it just kind of creates chaos in our world. I don't know about you, I've personally definitely experienced rejection on that level that says, man, which way's up, right? What do I do with this? And then even on another level that's probably even deeper than that, sometimes we're aware of our own actions, of the things we've done that have maybe created that rejection. I mean, we feel guilt, we feel shame about that, and it's so difficult to say, where's joy at again? Maybe we say things like this, man, am I ever going to be happy again? Am I ever going to know what it feels like to have this real and authentic joy in my life when I've been rejected on such a deep level? There's a verse in your outline from Isaiah chapter 53, and what's interesting, just to unpack this for a second, invite the band to come on back up too, to unpack this for just a moment. See, Isaiah chapter 9 is what we've been looking at. So we've been looking at in the series. It's a wonderful, exciting prophecy. It's about Jesus. And it says this leader is going to come. He's going to liberate not just the nation of Israel, but the whole world. And he's a wonderful counselor. He's a mighty God. He's an everlasting Father. And it's this victorious text, and we can all resonate with it, especially this time of year. It's like, yeah, that's awesome. I can identify joy in that verse. But in Isaiah chapter 53, what's interesting, Isaiah 53, if you were to go home and read it, see, it's also a story, it's also a prophecy in the same way about Jesus, about who Jesus will be. But it's interesting, it's not construed in the same way at all. There's no talk of this victory. There's no talk of this increase of government. Isaiah 53 unpacks what Jesus will do for us as what the Bible calls a suffering servant. Here's what Isaiah 53, 4 through 6 says. It says, surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. And so when Isaiah 53 is a prophecy about this, it says that, yeah, God's going to come to earth. Jesus Christ is going to, as God's Son, take on human form. But then there's prophecy that says, and then he's going to absorb all of the rejection, all of the pain, all the hurt that we feel, right? That Jesus is going to absorb that in a tangible way. And so the invitation around Christmas and around joy, and you guys can begin to play, is there's a significance in forgiveness that's even going to go beyond our moments of rejection. That in this story about Jesus coming towards us, coming to earth, if we were to step back, we would recognize this, that what Christmas means for us, what Christmas means for me, is not that joy's a possibility, it's that joy's an inevitability. Right? That there's a God who's going to come to earth, not just in victory and in joy, but there's a God who's going to come to earth, and he's going to stand in the gap for all of my rejection, for all your rejection. And ultimately, that's the story about Christmas. That's the story about Christmas, is that for the moments we've become insecure, for the moments we're unsure about who we are, about what our identity is, there's an invitation from Jesus to say, find your identity in my death and resurrection. Man, those things that hold you up, that rejection that separates you from joy, let me absorb that. That's the invitation from Jesus here this morning. And so here's what we're going to do as we close our time together. We're gonna take communion together. And in communion, what we do is we remember what that sacrifice means. We remember that Jesus' sacrifice is really the gateway towards our forgiveness. So here's how we're going to do that this morning. The ushers are going to pass the elements. I'd invite you to hold on to those. The band's going to play a song, and then I'll come up and we'll receive the elements together.
For the love poured out, for the price of freedom. Let the whole earth sing, hear the praises rising. We stand in awe of what you've done for us at the cross, the hope of the world. Stand here
night he was betrayed, Jesus took bread and broke it and said, "Take and eat. This is my body broken for you." Take the bread together. Scripture says, in the same way, after supper, he took the cup. And he said, "This cup is a new covenant in my blood, shed for the remission of sins. As often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes again." We take the cup together. And will you pray with me? Father, we're so grateful, God, for the communion we have with you. But God, as we remember your death and resurrection, we're so grateful for what Christmas means. God, we're grateful that you came towards earth, that you came towards us, even when we were isolated, even when we were lonely, even in our discouragement, that God, that you came near and you offered us a path forward. God, for all of our moments of rejection where we felt like we were insignificant, where we felt like we were so far from you, God, that you've created the way forward, back to a relationship with you. God, and we don't want to overlook this morning what that forgiveness cost. God, and what it means for our lives and for our future. Lord, I pray for all my friends here at LivePoint, God, in this season, who might say, "I don't know if I'm experiencing real joy. I don't know if I'm experiencing authentic joy when I look around and everyone else seems to be filled with so much joy. They have so much hope for what's ahead." Lord, I pray that you'd be especially near my friends this morning who might find themselves in that place. God, I pray that as we look ahead, we'd respond to the invitations you present us this Christmas, just to find our joy in you. Pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Can we say Nick? Can you do that, please?
Welcome.
That's a fantastic message. I absolutely loved when you said that, joy was not only available, but it was inevitable. And really, when we start thinking about the Christmas story and really what it really means, the reason why it's inevitable is because it'll put you in a position of gratitude where you are just thankful for what God has done. And so thank you, Nick, so much for that. Thanks for speaking on rejection, too, because I really didn't get a Christmas card, just to let you know. And so this will be the last time you see him because I'm questioning our friendship. But anyway, I am thrilled that you're here. Thank you again so much for coming. In just a moment, the buckets are going to pass. Please take a moment, drop those connection cards in there if you had a chance to fill them out. We love to be able to pray for all those prayer requests. Also, if you came today prepared to give, drop that in the bucket as well. But again, thank you so much for your generosity. Thanks for continuing to give and support what God is doing in this community, as well as building hope. We're going to sing one last song together, but before we do, I know Pastor Doug has an update on building hope. Ushers, please come forward.
Hello, LivePoint. Pastor Doug here with our Building Hope update. There are 3 important things that I want to tell you about. One is that God is so good. He has raised over $1,400,000 in pledges through you. You are such a giving and generous church. You are making the intentional choice to invest in the lives of others. The second thing is that we have contracted with CPM Construction, a Snohomish-based contractor with a great reputation and tons of experience in working with churches. The third thing I want to update you on is waiting. Yes, that's right, waiting. If you've ever built a home or maybe put an addition on your home, you know that the permit processes can be frustrating. Please pray for our permit process. We are waiting for the final permit from the county so that we can begin construction. And honestly, we don't know if it's going to be 1 month or a few months. Waiting can be hard, but folks, God is the project manager. He's in control, and His timing is always perfect. That we know for certain. So we are trusting Him through this process. Thank you, LivePoint, for your continued prayers and generosity.
Well, hey, we're going to sing one last chorus. Let's stand and sing together.